Welcome to the Game Changers Collective podcast. Today, I'm joined by Ryan Soave, a trauma and mindfulness expert, licensed mental health counselor, and internationally recognized speaker who has spent over a decade helping leaders and organizations navigate healing, self discovery, and personal transformation. With a background that blends neuroscience, somatic therapy, and ancient wisdom practices, Ryan's work goes far beyond traditional talk therapy. In this conversation, we dive into his journey, the science and spirituality behind his methods, and the practical tools you can start using today to create lasting change. Let's get into the episode. Well, nice to have you, Ryan.
Oh, it's nice to be here, Cassie.
So, Ryan, tell me a little bit about, where you kind of got started and, why you're here today.
I'm a therapist. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I've been in the field for about 15 years. That's not what I started my career as. I came out of college and went into the business world. I was part of a family business doing real estate development and home building. And then I started my own business. Eventually, some of my history caught up to me, and I ended up getting sober. I came through the recovery process myself. I was a product of really good treatment. I got to be able to, fortunately, I was shepherded to the hands and care of some really good people who could help me see that I didn't need to live the way I was living. My kind of solution up to that point was, I'm either going to figure this out on my own or I'm going to kill myself, I learned later on that I never wanted to die. I just didn't want to live the way I was living, and I didn't really know any other way. From the outside, things looked pretty good. They were starting to not. I was kind of at an age where, I could hide amongst my peer group who were partying and doing stuff like that, but then I would carry on and do it by myself and just kind of live in misery and fear. And, and it wasn't for lack of love and support from my family. I've had a ton of great friends, and anyway, I was fortunate enough to find really great treatment, and then got into a program of recovery and, was able to build a life. And a couple years into it, I went back to school, and, I'd always wanted to do something where I was helping people. I just had always thought that, I needed to make a bunch of money first and then I could do it. And what I learned was there was never, with that orientation, there was never a dollar that you would stop on, and I, took a risk and went back to school, and it felt like a risk then. It probably wasn't really a risk, but it felt like one, and started working in the treatment industry and working with people who were, at a facility where people would come and stay with us for very long periods of times, 3 months to a year. And we were working with really complex trauma, addictions, and family systems. I just really, it sounds kind of maybe sick to say, but I really enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy that people went through that, but I just really fell in love with the process of seeing how the human spirit can prevail through what I would have thought before were the most devastating, disgusting, terrible, circumstances, and see people turn what they might see as the shit of their lives into kind of fertile ground to become the fertilizer for a really great life to grow. And I also learned that wasn't me or the team creating it. We got to really just bear witness and hold space for these people and, use our training and expertise and all of that. But we're really standing next to them or maybe even a little bit behind them, just encouraging them, challenging them, and seeing when people transform. And so I've been doing that for about 15 years, done it in different parts of the field, from, working in a agency to being a private practice therapist. It's also taken me out into doing kind of leadership trainings and development and, working with larger like corporate systems and doing coaching with people who maybe weren't identifying with what they were experiencing as trauma or mental health, but they were held back in certain ways. And what I found in my career is that, even for people that maybe were at that facility where I was working, their lives had come to a place where they needed to be away for so long that as they healed and grew, the challenges that they had didn't completely go away. They just surfaced sometimes in different, much less acute ways. And maybe they got their lives to a place where, they really liked them, but now they were trying to grow even more. And they were being held back by limiting beliefs like, who do you think you are? Or I'm not good enough. And I've run into that in people that didn't need to go to treatment. I've run into that with very successful people who have built awesome lives and look really successful and have been really successful, yet they can run a business, but maybe have challenges with their relationships or keeping one together. So I've worked in different areas, and I've also done consulting for groups, and I'm just always trying to learn more about how to even more upstream impact the way that mental health and substance and alcohol use treatment is done in our country and in the world. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to what brought me here, but that's what brought me here. A lot of pain and suffering. I will tell you that. A lot of pain and suffering that I didn't need ended up bringing me here. And, that's the beauty of it. Like, I don't have to regret that. A wise man once told me, Ryan, you can't use the wisdom you got until you stop bitching about how you got it. So
Right,
I'm
and if
trying
you
to do
wanted
that.
to, blame all the bad stuff on, what happened, you also have to, thank all of it for where you are right now. That was something that I read that and that kinda, like, stopped me in my tracks. I was like, "That's true." I forgot what seminar or retreat I was at, but the speaker was saying that, if you wanna, say, "Oh, X, Y, and Z happened, and that's why I'm here and everything," and you kind of look at it in a negative light, but sometimes the most successful people that build the most incredible lives are those people that survived, trauma and pulled themselves out of it, and, they were like, "I wanna make, life count," especially if they got, a second chance, which, like, so many of us did. So, yeah, I think that's hitting the nail on the head. And something you spoke about on Huberman, though, that really hit me was, the current version of you that's sitting in front of, the person you're connecting with is really just sort of programming and collection of experiences that led you up until this moment right here. And so, yeah, if you want to speak on that a little bit, because I think that that's just really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people hear programming and they might think that, people don't have choice or anything like that. That's not what I want to communicate. It's just that every one of us has a history. All of us have a history. We have a history that is not just our past where we grew up, although it's important to look at how we grew up and how we were shaped in our formative years, because we call them our formative years for a reason. It's really where our brains are most developing and how we learn how to be in relationship early on, and if there's never any intervention on that, and I don't mean that it's all bad, but if there is something that's not effective in it and it's not kind of addressed, then we kind of just keep doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just recognizing that we get shaped in certain ways by the people we're in relationships with, by the experiences that we have, by what we choose to read and learn and watch and all of that. But that history isn't just our childhood. That history goes up. I'm a little bit older than you. But I'll be 50 this year, and my history goes up to today's what, 16th, 15th, the 15th, right? So it goes up to August at 2:47 Eastern time. It goes up to August 15th at 2:46 Eastern time, right? What I just experienced, unless it's really kind of a major, like if I experienced something yesterday, unless it was very, very impactful, it's probably not going to reshape my brain like experiences when I was younger. Although the fastest way we would say to brain plasticity as an adult is to experience a significant traumatic event, which we can speak about later. But I think I've kind of broken that down in what you're talking about, and that we have this. You said our current self, like we don't really have another self than what we have, but we can react to current events based on things that have happened in our past. And if we start to get to know ourselves, at least I can, and a lot of people I work with and a lot of people I know can recognize that maybe the reaction that they're having to something that's happening in a relationship right now could feel very much like the way that they were reacting when they were much younger, even a child. Sometimes we'll ask people when they're, in therapy, how old do you feel right now? People will stop, and often they'll go, I feel like I did when I was 12. And they'll find themselves in what we call an ego state, right? Of development of maybe a more immature person. I mean, immature emotionally, right? So if you think of a child, they from 0 to 5, they're going to, have a certain relationship with emotions. And then from, I have one in that range. I have a one in the who's 6, the 3-year-old and the 6-year-old react, have very different emotional experiences or relationship to emotions. And, it's part of their brain development, and then you see a teenager, and a lot of people will say, I had this kid and they were a teenager and it was like aliens came down and kidnapped them and put somebody else right in there who just all of a sudden started fighting with me and resisting and all of that kind of stuff. And then several years later, it was like the aliens came back and put them back and they were okay. You know what I mean? But that's part of that development when you're a teenager, is to really kind of push boundaries to, and their brains aren't fully developed. So they'll have more immature reactions to things and haven't really quite developed discernment, as it relates to our emotions. If we're a functional adult, let's say there is a functional adult, right? Let's say there is. And that person has developed, has emotionally matured appropriate to their age, right? So if they're at 30 or 40 or 50, it might be a little bit further as we go on and develop more experiences and kind of wisdom in life. But that person in a functional state will be able to recognize the emotion they're experiencing, experience the emotion they're experiencing, and still choose their actions based on, not the fear that they have or the sadness or whatever, but choose, not let the emotions choose for them, and make the choices that are going to kind of progress them in the direction they want to go, rather than just being kind of blown around in an emotional storm. Now, I had a trainer in a training once, and they were talking about these ego states, and they were talking about this like functional adult that, I just kind of talked about, that, can identify, experience, and discern. And they said that's not where you live all of the time. And I don't know if this is not scientifically true by any means, but I remember she said, if you're living in that state 60 to 70% of the time, you're doing a pretty good job. Meaning, even very emotionally healthy people are going to have reactions to things. And I remember I've always stayed in therapy or coaching myself. I think it's paramount it's great for anybody, but it's also paramount for someone who's working with others to have that level of supervision, but also really to know yourself. And I mean, I've been in the field a long time. I was experienced. I could teach courses and trainings, and my therapist is this very seasoned kind of psychotherapist. And something had happened. I don't even remember what it was, and I was distraught because something had happened, I think, in our family, and I was mad. I was angry, and we were talking about being angry. And then I and I said, yeah, but I wasn't nice in the way that I responded. And she stopped me and she said, Ryan, most people aren't very nice when they're angry. like, not that it's okay to not be nice, but I was beating myself up for this kind of emotional experience I had. And the point is, that we're gonna have reactions to things. Even, you know, people that I've met that are very, very, I would hold as very, very spiritual and present, tend to have reactions to things. The difference is they kind of like, they're present and then they're gone. They're not like attached to that experience. So when the trainer said, is it, it's pretty good if you're in that 60 or 70% of the time, I said, yeah, can I just be really good for 7 days and then just be a total jerk for 3 days in a row? She said, no, that's not how it works. What I'm getting at is that we'll have these, what can be called like ego regressions. And it's not like it's the state, we're kind of regressing in a way to a state that's less mature, or like we were earlier on. We're not actually turning into a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old. And, when you're throwing a tantrum because you're not getting your way as an adult, and throwing a tantrum might not look like yelling, screaming, and kicking. It might look more polished because you've been doing it a long time. It might look like being manipulative, or maybe even codependent, or trying to stay in control of situations. When you see someone throwing a tantrum, it's easy to see, or you're doing it, it's easy to say, hey, that looks like a kid, right? And so I hope I'm painting a picture that's clear. It's not like we're actually becoming that, but we kind of, if we look at it in a way and frame it as if we're regressing, that means oftentimes if you and I are, let's say, if we have a relationship, I work with your company on some stuff, and and we get it. Let's say we haven't, I don't see why we would, but we got into like an argument over something that I saw one way and you saw another, and we were both really fixed at it. I have a feeling that both of us are a little bit stubborn and like to like lean toward being in control a little bit. No, not you. I mean, it's in a, when it's functional, it's like a great thing, right? You're seen as a leader and all of that stuff. When it's like so like, you know, if we were really like arguing over something like that, and we're fighting like kids, it's almost like we're not even, it's not me with you. It's almost like my history and experience with
Mhm.
your history and experience. This
Yeah.
happens a lot in romantic relationships. If my wife and I are like we're both reacting to something, and we're in an argument. And I love my wife. She's my best friend. I want to spend my life with her. I want to be with her. And just like any relationship that's really close like that, I believe, it's not just, I don't know if this was from Course in Miracles or somebody else where they were saying like love brings up everything that love is not for the purposes of healing. Like, I don't know if that's true, but I've experienced like in order for us to be able to disagree and challenge each other, we can love more deeply through that. It doesn't always feel great. It's easy to say, but if we're in something, when our older son would react to, would be being a teenager, right? She would see him when we're stressed over something, and it's easy to get stressed with a teenager. Anybody that says otherwise, maybe they're right. I don't know. But I was a teenager and it's easy to stress people out. I feeling you were a teenager that could stress people out. I don't know about you, but I don't want to hang out with my teenage self, be a little embarrassed. But, you know, um, when he would do something, she would see him as like a 2-month old that needed to be held like a baby. And I would see him like a 45-year-old man that just needs to get a job and get his act together. Neither of which is like super healthy, but, we're having a reaction. And then when we're my thing is I want to work things out and talk about it. She wants to work it out too, but I want to get like, let's get through this. And she might want to get quiet and think about it. And, when we get in conflict like that, it's often like her history and my history have hijacked ourselves, and they're the ones having an argument. And I see that it's not just, I see that with in many, many, if not all romantic relationships. It happens. And when you can recognize it, it doesn't mean it's going to completely stop. But I believe when we're in recovery, and this doesn't mean addiction, I just mean in a healing process, that recovery means I can recognize when I'm in a state sooner and kind of get back into the more functional state quicker. I don't know if that answered I was again, a long answer, but I think that's what you were alluding to.
Yes, 100%. I mean, that, like, stuck with me so much where it's, their history and your history are really, kind of clashing, and it's just hearing you say that when I originally heard you say it the first time, it changed how I saw everything, quite honestly, because every single person that I interact with now, I'm like, "Okay, I'm talking to, like, your little baby self, your teenage self, like, your young adult self, all the trauma you've had, every time you've been, hurt, and, like, that's what you're hyper vigilant about. You're always looking to like, who's going to hurt me? Am I safe? And I think that there's definitely a new level of healing that's unlocked when you meet that partner that makes you
Yeah.
feel safe and that wants to talk to you and wants to get through it and is emotionally intelligent, emotionally mature, because I think there's just certain levels of healing that can't take place until you're in a safe container, whatever that is. And for me,
And I
that
think a safe container, I think, is really two
yeah.
things. Number
No, good.
one, because it's our history arguing with their history in that way we look at it, that doesn't mean that we're not held accountable for what we do, right? It's still me doing it. If I'm being a jerk, it doesn't let us off. But secondly, I think, something that's safe, I think we make a distinction between that safe container and feeling safe, because I really think a really functional relationship is one where we can know we're safe and also sometimes feel unsafe. Not because it's true that we're unsafe, but because that's the experience I'm having, and not to always trust that. Because if we are in that way regressing to a state that's earlier on, there are things that we experienced early on in life that to an adult, to Cassie now, is not actually unsafe. But then it would have been. To be abandoned and neglected as a baby or a small child is deadly. You cannot be abandoned or neglected in that way anymore. Someone can leave you, someone can hurt you, someone can die, but that you still have the ability to care for and you can feel really bad, but you're not going to actually, your life is not threatened by them doing that.
A great distinction to make 100%. Yeah, and I think, of course, everyone, arguing, you're always going to get in arguments, you're always going to have disagreements with your partner. But as long as the relationship container remains like a safe space, then you feel safe, even if you're having an argument or a disagreement, because that's always going to happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as far as working with, couples, what would you say is kind of I know like they say, everyone has specific arguments, but you're kind of always having the same argument. It's just over something different, but it's usually the same argument, the same pattern happening.
So let's look at it as, for purposes of this answer, we'll say it's, instead of argument, we're going to say disagreement. Okay. So they're having a disagreement and it ends up being the same disagreement. I think that in a long-term relationship, and other people may disagree with this, but love is not really a feeling. Now, the feeling of love can exist in it, but we make commitments to our partners. I have this ring that we made as declaration and commitment, in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. If I like, you don't make that commitment like that if you're going to feel the way that you felt about the person the first time you saw them and the first date you went on, right? The commitment, if you're one that makes those in relationships, which a lot of people are. A friend of mine, I think it was Dr. Ray Blanchard, used to say, that commitment is what shows up when all the good feelings the good feelings we had when we made the commitment fall away. Like, I'm gonna, I'm so excited to get up tomorrow at 5 a.m., 4:30, and be at the gym at 5 a.m. Right? Like, I can say that now. I can be excited about it. There has never been a time in my life when I've done that the alarm goes off at 4:30 that I'm as excited as when I went up. So my commitment is revealed by if I get out of bed or not. Right? So I'm like, this sucks. I hate it. I get up. I go. Right? So there's gonna be those ups and downs, and I think we could actually define love in that long-term relationship where we're going to have the feelings of love, but that love is a set of agreements, right? And if people get married traditionally, like in the ways you'd see on TV and like what we did, and you have a ceremony where you make these commitments, you make a set of agreements in sickness and health, whatever your vows are, all of that. It's not unlike if you were to go rent a house, you write an agreement. Oh, and you're saying, I'm going to stay in this house for this long. This might not be the best analogy for marriage because you're renting it for a period of time, but please suspend your disbelief. But you have an agreement, and it says who pays for what, how much you pay when you're there. And if there's a disagreement, the first thing you do is you go back to the agreement to see if it's spelled out. So if you're like, the dishwasher breaks and you're like, well, landlord's got to come fix this, and he says no, and now you're in a disagreement, you'd go look at the agreement and see that, oh, well, it says here that I'm supposed to pay for it, or it says here that he's supposed to pay for it. And then you'd follow that agreement. You also might find that you forgot to put that in there. So then what do you have to do? You make a new agreement. So oftentimes people, I think, especially in marriage, will make these big declarations and then never revisit it again. And when there's a disagreement, it's just based on, and I can speak from experience for this, it's just based on the feelings that we're having in the moment. It's not based on what commitments we've made, or what agreements we've made, which then have commitments that are come out of them. And I'm convinced that the probably 99 point, again, not scientifically backed, but 9% of our disagreements in loving relationships are implicit agreements that have not been made explicit. Implicit meaning, I think it's supposed to go this way and you're supposed to react this way. And you think I'm supposed to be this, it's supposed to go this way, and I'm supposed to react that way. And we haven't made it explicit. And so I'm not suggesting that you necessarily like make a 3,000 page document that you refer to every time, but to establish agreements on how you're going to be in relationship with each other, how we love each other, how we argue with each other, how we, treat each other, you know, how we call people when they're not keeping the agreement that we've made, how we discuss these things. And so, I have a mentor of mine that he may listen to this, so I'm not gonna say he's super old, but he's older than me. He's been married a lot longer. He's got, grown children. He's got a great family. I really love and respect him. I also love, he's not a therapist. I can think through things, and he's just very simple and right to the point. So, we've developed a relationship where he knows what's really important to me, and I know what's really important to him. We've kind of a back and forth with that. And my marriage is, like, I would say, the most important thing to me, with a very close second. I mean, my spiritual relationship and my sobriety is first, but when it comes to my relationships, my relationship with my wife, and then very close behind that, my kids. It might sound a little backwards because people often say, your kids are the most important, but when I I have found for us, when we can make our relationship most important, it lets everything blossom. But that might be a whole other podcast. So he knows how important that is to me. And if I call him and I'm like, I can't believe we're doing this, and she said this, and he just stops me. He goes, Ryan, you love her, and he knows the answer to this. But every time he says that, it stops me, and I go, yeah, like none of this other, like this is dumb.
Right.
It
Do you wanna
doesn't
be
mean
right
that there's
or do
not
you want
something.
to be in love?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that there's not something we have to work through, but like most of the stuff that I've ever argued about with my wife, I don't even remember. It's not like, it's just like, okay. And sometimes to the point where I'll call him and be like, don't ask me the question. I need to run this, like I'm like, don't ask me. I'm really mad. Don't ask me. But like it catches me. And that's because we've built a relationship, and he reminds me of that agreement that she and I have made, and the commitment that I've made out of that agreement, that's the most important relationship in my life, other than my relationship with God, which is a whole other, and my sobriety, which she and I have that agreement with each other, that's what we have. So I think it's that implicit agreement that hasn't been made explicit. So coming back to your question, if people are arguing over the same thing again and again, like maybe talk about that thing when you're not arguing and figure out what's the agreement you have around it. If it's about who picks up does the dishes, who does this, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy conversation. It doesn't mean, but if two people come in, especially if they come in and they've lived adult lives, they're going to live, and all of a sudden they move in together. People live differently. People have different personalities, and you start bumping up against each other, and it's challenging, and you got to work through that stuff. It's maybe not as cut and dry as the lease agreement, but it's not that much different. So and it might just start with, what implicit agreements do I have? What are the things? And that's really like an expectation, right? I have this expectation and you have a different expectation, and we haven't really worked through it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, Jefferson Fisher talks about too. I don't know if you've ever listened to him like on audio or anything, but he's a personal injury attorney who got very good at communication, reading people, how to keep his clients, calm during depositions and things like that. And he talks about when with disagreements with, your partner, it's like, okay, best case scenario, you win an argument, what, you like hurt that person or made them feel defeated and like you get to be
Right.
right, like that's not a reward.
Yeah. And also, like, this is not easy. Listen, some of these things are not easy. Many of them are not easy for me. It doesn't mean we don't strive for them. But, you know, especially when we love so deeply and passionately, it becomes challenging, because that sets up an expectation of how we're going to live our lives, and, and, what stressors we're going to experience or not experience, and, all of that. But, if when we can approach disagreement with curiosity, it leads to, like, innovation in the world doesn't happen without, like, disagreement. Someone disagrees with the way things are to invent something new. And so, I've said this before on other, where, like, my wife and I are probably 99.999%, if not 100%, on the same page of what we want for our children. On a good day, we're lucky if we're 70% of the way there on how to get there, on the same page about how to get there. I talked about under stress, how we would see our son, right? And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing. But when I'm seeing it a very specific way and she's seeing it a very specific way, when we can disagree and be curious about that, we can come up with a new way or work together to parent better, which we really need to do, because the first child was the first child, and we're going to parent a certain way, because there's no, like, instruction book. I mean, there's a lot of instruction books, but there's not an instruction book for every single personality and everything you're going to deal with in your own history and what they're dealing with. And then another one comes and they've got a different personality and you've got different experiences and you're different ages. I love how Gabor Mate says, like, no siblings have the same parent. I think it was him that said that, right? That they're going to have different they relate. Even twins can have different parents. I mean, they're the same people, but in the way that they relate to them, but especially when they're coming at different ages, we have a big spread. We have 18, 6, and 3. For 18, at 6 years old, we were both, in our 30s. At the 6-year-old, she's born in our 40s, and the 3-year-old is a little bit, I'm going to be in my mid 60s when he graduates high school. We're going to have a very different relationships with them, just because we've learned and grown, or hopefully grown, or different things are happening in the world. So that disagreement, when we can get curious about it, I would say that's in any relationship. I would also say that's on any team. I mean, you hear great leaders talk about they surround themselves with people. They'll say, I surround myself with people smarter than me. I think that that's code for I want people who disagree with me and challenge me because we can figure things out and make them better.
Yeah, I love what you mentioned with no siblings have the same parents. I don't have any siblings personally, but it reminded me of a story that I heard from Tony Robbins, but I'm sure a lot of people share it. And it's basically there's two twin boys. They have a alcoholic, abusive father. They both grow up. One of them's super successful, has a great family, he's a great father. The other one, in and out of prison, rehab, like can't figure it out, having all these issues. And you ask both of them, why do you live the way that you live? And they say, well, look at my dad,
Yeah.
right? And they
Yeah.
go completely different routes. That like really hit for me because like I've had therapists say to me, over the years, it's very like surprising that you like turned out the way that you did and you overcame so much, and a lot of people don't go that route, and you have a good head on your shoulders. And I remember the first time someone said that to me, I was like 16. I was like doing good in school and like wanting to go to college and pushing myself in sports, and they were like, with everything that you have going on right now, you're like really doing a good job. And I was like, well, yeah, I got to get out of it, right? Like, I got to get to the
Yeah.
other side. And I think that, and there's those slight moments, those slight experiences in life that tweak you on that path, right?
Let me
That
ask you, when they would say that to you at 16, did you feel like you were getting through it like they said, or do you feel like you were just not just, but do you feel like you were shouldering it to get out of there?
I mean, yeah, I think I was like shouldering it to get out of there. I literally had a therapist say to me, get away and you'll be fine. If you get out of this, you will be fine. And, I'm here in Hawaii right now, so I got pretty far away. I really took that. I was like, prescription, got it. Like, I'll make this happen.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I mean, it was just for me, it was like, okay, like, gotta survive it, gotta get through it. I like definitely could say did not have healthy relationships or healthy communication modeled. And so in early relationships, I definitely like butt heads with my partner. Like I was not willing to listen. I was like, I'm right. I want to do it like this. I'm not being trapped ever again. I'm not having people tell me what to do ever again. So that was like the survival kind of like
yeah.
wall that
It's we're very adaptive as human beings are very adaptive, right? Even in the twin boy story you talked about, they both adapted in a certain way. And whether it looked uglier for one than the other or better for one than the other, they both survived, right? And you had an adaptation that looked really great and will serve you. It served you in your business. It served you, in how you work with others. But right, what you just described was there was also a maladaptive portion to that, right? Because when we adapt in that way, especially to trauma early on, it becomes kind of like one gear. Like I'm going to do this in all my relationships.
yes.
You're not really making that decision consciously, but if you're doing that and you're having success in that at work, and you're able to own a business and start one very young and build it, but at the same time you're applying the same thing. If you're the boss and you're right, that might be one thing because you're the leader and they look up to you. But when you're in your relationship, it's not going to work out so well, right? So it's maladaptive in that, and it can be other ways that certain behaviors overall are just maladaptive. Like maybe a baby that needed to yell and scream just to get fed, they grow up and they're still yelling and screaming, hoping that they're just going to get fed, right? And they might yell and scream in different ways. That's maladaptive. And these adaptations can be adaptive and helpful in one situation and maladaptive in another. And being able to recognize that's where a lot of it gets challenging. When we work with people, at least when they come to us, I don't want to say like you need to change everything in your life, because everything that they did got them to where they are. They're gonna they succeeded. One might not feel like that. It might look really ugly, might feel terrible, but they made it through whatever they made it through. And we don't know that if it was any other way, they would have even been sitting like, we don't know if anything was any different in either of our lives that we'd be sitting here having this conversation. Much less, I mean, we wouldn't be that we'd be alive, much less sitting here having this conversation. So that ability to kind of build discernment, like we talked about either, and go, okay, what gear do I want to be in? I mean, is this a mountainous, bumpy road that I need to be in first gear? Or is this a racetrack where I need to, be driving a different way, or a highway where I need to be in fifth gear? right? And being able to do that with our lives, so I can know that this is the way I am in this situation, and I can adjust based on what's happening. But I think that's a very key thing for people to understand, that we're very adaptive, and some of these adaptations become maladaptive at certain points or under certain circumstances.
Right. The adaptations or, the behavioral patterns or whatever it is that you develop to survive. And you're
Yeah,
like, okay, like this is how I function. It might serve well on the outside, but internally, if you haven't processed that trauma, so like you might be like being really successful and like everything seems super good, but internally, like body keeps the score, right? Like your body remembers, your body holds on to it if you don't work through it. And that's something that I really experienced because I got out, right? I went to college. I was away at college my freshman year summer, started getting hives. I started never had hives before, itchiness, anything like that. And I was like, that's weird. And so it got kind of worse. And I'd go to, the walk in and they'd give me like a Z pack of steroids. And they'd send me home and I'd take them, and then a week later, the hives would come back. I'd be like, "That's weird." Go back, they'd be like, "Oh, maybe it's like a detergent or something like that. Just take another pack of steroids and, like, we'll see." I did that, like, 3 or 4 times, and they were like, "Okay, you should go to a rheumatologist." So I go to a rheumatologist, they're like, "You have chronic severe urticaria," which is just a fancy word for hives. And then I continued to get these hives. Then I started to get swelling. My hands would swell, my feet would swell, face would swell. They were like, okay, now you've got idiopathic anaphylaxis, unexplained swelling of hands, feet, tightening of the chest, like an allergic reaction, basically. So I'm like, I'm chewing garlic roots and I'm like not eating vegan and I'm trying to do all these crazy
not
things.
kissing anybody because your breath
Right.
smells like
I'm
garlic.
just like putting myself in this like holistic bubble while also taking, Benadryl and antihistamines and steroids from the doctors who were just trying to keep this daily hives and swelling that I'm have, under wraps. So the whole summer goes by, still happening. I'm like, got to go back to school for my sophomore year. And I would literally be covered in hives head to toe. I would wake up, my face would be swollen, eyes, lips, like hands. Like I looked like I was allergic to a bee and I got bit like every single day or stung. And so I would wake up in the morning and take Benadryl. And then it was like 3 Benadryl, 4 Benadryl. I was taking like 8 or 9 Benadryl and then going to class all day. And Benadryl is like drowsy. So it's making me tired. It's making me irritable. And then I'm
Yeah.
taking prednisone. They had me on like 90 milligrams of prednisone. I'm going to all these different doctors. I'm going to Mayo Clinic. They're giving me asthma injections. They're giving me all these different things to try and help it. And nothing's really helping. Every single day, I'm still waking up with hives. So they put me on this like experimental injection every 2 weeks, and I had to wait there for 3 hours to make sure I didn't have some kind of reaction. And this is while I'm juggling school, trying to have a social life, trying to, date and all these things. I'm away at college, in Florida. I'm originally from Connecticut. So I'm, there by myself, trying to figure this all out. Again, just like survive it, get through it, heal it on my own, figure out what that looks like. And so this went on for 2 years, 3 years
Wow.
until my junior year, and I this was just, like, my life. I was like, "Okay," like, I just take Benadryl every day and I have hives and, like, I just put some makeup on
Push through.
them. Yeah, just push through. And then so, I had the opportunity to move out to Hawaii at the end of my, 3rd year, my junior year, and I was gonna graduate early, so I was like, I'll just finish my last single credit class I have to. And so moved out and then started going to a new chiropractor because I had always gone to the chiropractor. So I needed a new one on island. When I went to the chiropractor, I met the acupuncturist that worked there. And he was like, you have any health stuff going on or whatever? And I was like, yeah, I've, had this like autoimmune thing that these hives for the past several years, like no one can really figure it out. I'm on, all these medications. I get this injection. He was like, "What was your childhood like? Did you have any trauma?" That was the first time anyone had ever asked me that question. I'd gone to the Mayo Clinic, I'd gone to like 20 different specialists. The first time anyone had ever said, "What was your childhood like? Did you have any trauma?" And I was like, "Yeah, it was kind of rough." And I started to tell him about it. And he was like, "I think this is all like, he wasn't saying psychological, like to gaslight me about it in any way or like, unvalidate, what I was feeling or the symptoms. But he was like, I think that this is all kind of from that. And he was like, would you be open to letting me, treat you with the kind of energy work and energy clearing and all of that? And once I heard that from him, that was even, a possibility, I had no idea that very often manifests as autoimmune. I had no idea. No one had ever said that to me. So I was like, of course, I wanted to do that work with him, and he really became a strong mentor of mine. But also, I just dove into it with podcasts, retreats, like all different kinds of things to just learn about it because I had no idea about, spirituality, healing. I was raised Roman Catholic, right? They're not really teaching all of that. And so as I kind of, educated myself and went through all of that, I called my doctor and I said, "Hey, I'm not coming in for my next injection. I'm going to heal myself with my mind. I don't need to, come get these steroid injections anymore." And she was like, "I don't advise that. And I was like, "Well, that's what I'm going to do." And she was like, "Well, I'll see you in 2 weeks when you're, covered in hives because this is not going to work." And that was, knock on wood, like 8 years ago. And I don't
No
have hives
highs.
anymore. No hives, no swelling, nothing, no symptoms, just like completely gone. And I really think it was because I felt all of my trauma, everything that was unresolved. I started doing, all different kinds of therapies, plant medicine to just kind of work through all of that. And then it kind of just like left my body because it
So
was,
nobody did any sort of psychological background in any of those doctors? Did they ever ask you about even stress?
I don't remember that. And I think stress too, like when people say, like, "Oh, are you stressed?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'm a college student, everybody's
Yeah,
stressed."
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it
I'm
was
just
the
like, even if it
trauma
was,
question, the
I'm
history
not
that
I'm not surprised by that. It's unfortunate. And even what you said, where, he wasn't saying it was gaslighting you to be psychological. I think something very important, a distinction to make is that, if someone says, if they're talking about something that's psychosomatic, or in the DSM, they call them the somatoforms, like somatic means of the body, right? So psychosomatic would be of the mind and the body. It doesn't mean that it's in your head that it's happening. It's actually happening. The hives weren't in your head. You were having hives, but there's something in your body, and I would probably say more than your mind, your nervous system, that's driving you in a way that it sees itself at threat all the time, and that throws the immune system out of whack, right? So, if when we're in fight or flight, right, when we're running for our lives, or an animal, we're using all of the energy possible that we need to get away or fight. You don't really need your sexual organs, you don't need to digest food, you don't need saliva. It's just like you need all that energy going somewhere. This is a very basic way of putting it. There might be a scientific way that someone could, challenge me on that, but essentially we need all that energy. And I can just say that over the years, so many people, we're meant to go in those states for very brief periods of time until you're to safety. But if it's happening in your family or in your school or around in your childhood, there's a part of you that's never safe. And you might not know that, but in fact, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that they're stressed until at some point later in life they experience something that's a little bit different, and they're like, "Whoa, I didn't even know I could feel that way."
yes.
And oftentimes that's just coming back off it a little bit. Probably you just hearing that as a thing like was a sense of relief. And then there was a lot of work to do. And so I've had people over the years come in with, Peter Levine talks about, he's a psychologist that wrote Waking the Tiger and a couple other books and developed somatic experiencing. I think it's in Waking Tiger. He describes something where someone, either he's describing or it's about someone in there that's saying that having that unresolved trauma is like driving with your foot on the gas and the brake,
Yes, I've heard that.
right? So take an engine in a car and put the brake on as hard as you can and put the gas down. You don't need to be a great mechanic to know the engine's going to burn out. Well, we're an engine, right? And if you're like living at that level of stress all the time, which might just feel normal to you, then it's going to start burning up. And I mean, hives are a great representation of the body kind of burning up. Again, a medical professional might challenge that a little bit, but it's like inflammation coming out in some way, right? So if people that will come in and have all kinds of, problems with, endometriosis, endometriosis.
Yes,
Am I saying that right?
endometriosis, I have that actually.
Endometriosis, right? Erectile dysfunction, digestive problems, things with their skin, and it's not that, medicine can't be helpful, but because I just believe a lot of it should be used interventionally, and I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know every situation. Looking at your case, you may have needed that at the time, but what would have been helpful is to say, let me get on some medication to bring down the symptoms a bit so that I can address this other part. Again, I don't know what the whole case was, but it doesn't mean we have to throw out all of the instruments that could be used. But I think a lot of times you just start treating the symptoms and continue treating the symptoms without looking at what else might be going on and what are the stressors that I can start. Where's the traumatic stress that I can start to address and eventually kind of relieve myself of with help.
Yeah. I mean, I'm 28, about to turn 29 next month, and I would say that I never experienced feeling peace, calm, safe, like, presence, not in a hyper arousal, basically crisis state until, like, 25, 26.
Yeah.
Like, was the first time that I was really like, "Oh, this is what it feels like."
Yeah.
I
I
didn't
mean,
even
listen,
know.
if this is stressed and this is relaxed, I think most people don't know what this is. They know what this is, and it
Mm,
feels great. And you get like this during the day, and then you do your strategies, and you get like this, and then you just go back to this, right? I mean, this might not be most people, but a lot of people that are, we live in a very stressed, there's a lot of information coming at us. A lot of the strategies that we do, watching TV, having glasses of wine, whatever it is that people do, they might relax them in the moment, but it's not necessarily getting to that totally relaxed place. And it doesn't mean that's the way you have to live. You just want access to all of it. Like being able to handle a lot of stress also is beneficial for you. The challenge is when you're living up at this level of stress, it only takes, and like this is the maximum, it only takes this much to throw you over the edge. You want to be able to like kind of, and we're kind of built like that, right? The inhale is like more parasympathetic, it's relaxing. The exhale, I mean, the inhale is more sympathetic where we're bringing energy into our body. The exhale is more parasympathetic where we're kind of relaxing ourselves. So our energy level is kind of going, we'd say stress like this throughout the day, and it's when something happens that we get dysregulated. But if you have early on trauma, oftentimes it gets dysregulated or you're born that way because that's the system you're in. You're not born that way, but I mean, born into it. And you stay at that level all the time and you don't know anything else. You're just able to push through things. And people are going, wow, Cassie, you're really doing great. Just get out of here. And that might have been a great strategy. But another strategy would have been, hey, Cassie, you really look like you're doing great, but based on what's happening, I wonder what's going on inside and what are the stressors that you're carrying and what's driving it. And you might not know the answer to that, but to start exploring that with you early on. And I'm not faulting the person that did that because they helped you greatly, but we're just often not armed with that information to be able to look a little bit deeper and understand. You ever, like at Thanksgiving, eat too much and
oh,
like
yeah.
pants feel a little tight? And if your pants feel a little tight, you're like, and then you like unbutton your pants, like it feels like amazing. It's like a new world, right? But if you button your pants right back up, it's going to feel tighter than it did before. And that's kind of how a lot of us will go through life. It's like I get stressed and I like alleviate some of it and then I just build back up to it and then I alleviate a little bit and I'm just going like this rather than maybe looking at the stuff. Because as you get, it wasn't probably hitting you at 15, 16 because you were still in it. And then as you get a little bit older and you're starting to bump up against it in relationships where it's causing things that you aren't just surviving, but it might be a little pain. And then and if you hadn't resolved it then, you would have just kept going through life and it could have really impacted you. If you've got all those hives and all these problems, you might not be able to be as active and all this kind of stuff. And it just builds up and builds up and builds up. So I'm sorry you experienced that. And I'm happy you experienced that.
Yes, me too. I mean, I live an incredible life, and I would not be living the life that I'm living right now if everything didn't happen the way it did. So, of course,
Yeah.
I made peace with all that and found, gratitude for it. I think like the first spiritual like book I ever read, self-help style book I ever read, my dad actually got it for me. It was from Urban Outfitters. He was just like in there looking for clothes, Christmas gift for me, and he just like picked it up and I can't remember what it was called, but I still have it. And one of the main thing that they're teaching in the book is treat everything that happens as the best possible thing that could have happened because that's that's what did happen and that's bringing you to basically like what is meant for you. So I don't know, an easy way that I always think about it is, you're kind of in a rush to get somewhere. Somebody pulls in front of you and they're driving so slow. That used to really irritate me. Now I always am like, thank you, universe, for like slowing me down. Like you're slowing me down so that I didn't get somewhere too fast or that I wasn't somewhere, maybe I would have been there a minute earlier and something would have happened. And so kind of treating everything that happens as the best possible things could have happened because I very much believe that the universe, has got your back and is aligning in your favor just because of what I've experienced. It was
Yeah.
hard
I
to
think
positive light and now I do.
that's a fantastic mindset to build to. And for those of you that might be listening that don't feel like you can build to that yet, know that that's something to strive for and, with work can get there, that if you're in the middle of something that feels so overwhelming and painful, it's hard. Sometimes the answer isn't just turning into I mean, this is Cassie coming to this. I think, Cassie, I don't want to speak for you, but coming to this after doing a lot of work, and I think, but that's a great framework to build to. And there's actually a pop psychology term for that. We have paranoia, which is like the world is conspiring against us. And I think it's just considered a pop psychology term. Maybe I made that part of it up, but it's pronoia, which means the universe is conspiring for us, and to help us. And that's not going to always get us out of that moment, but especially after. Listen, I have this belief. This is my personal belief, right? People say everything happens for a reason. I think that everything happens, and after it happens, we get to choose the reason. We get to decide if it's going to, after the fact, right? If we were victim of something, I might not be able to choose that. But after the fact, at some point, I am in charge. And this is different for a child. This is different, but I am in charge of whether I'm going to forgive and use it. I'm going to live in a victim state, or I'm going to live in a more responsible, accountable state. And I'm not saying that people can't feel that way and they're wrong for feeling that way. But at a certain point, as an adult, I get to choose. I get to write the story going forward. And that's really authenticity. I get to author my life no matter out of it. And that gives me agency. And I think that gives others agency to know at a certain point, it might not feel like agency, but it really is. At a certain point, you're in charge. This happened, and now I'm in charge. There's so much things we're not in control of, but after it happens, how we respond. Sometimes we need some real healing because it was an extremely traumatic event and our nervous system might be very dysregulated. But once we get to a certain point, and this is where help can come in, you're in charge. You get to decide.
Right? You don't get to control what happens, but you get to choose how you react.
Right. At a certain point, right? I always like to put a buffer in there because,
Yeah.
there's going to be some things that, I mean, we see things in the world that happen where it's so significant and impacts the safety and things that it's hard for people. Maybe some people can do it, but I think for a lot of people, it's hard to just immediately go to forgiveness when somebody does something to them. But, or something really, really bad happens. But at a certain point, I think we could say we can do it right away, but I like to give some grace there. Not that I'm the one granting grace, but not the one that I'm granting grace, but that if it were just if we could just heal it with a bumper sticker that gave good vibes, that's all we would do, right? And we're a little more complex than that, especially in the aftermath.
Yes, I definitely used to react very quickly without thinking. I would just be like, boom, like immediate reaction, just like not thinking about what I was going to say, always like very kind of defensive. And something that has helped me tremendously is breath work. And so just even before you respond, taking a breath and like thinking before just taking that moment to take a breath, it just completely relaxes your nervous system versus if you say something and immediately and I just start going. And so I free dive a lot. And through the breath work I've learned through free diving, I've really been like, oh, okay, if I want to lower my heart rate, I exhale. So for the
Mhm.
people listening, if you're not familiar, when you inhale, your heart rate rises. When you exhale, your heart rate drops. So if we can take a, slow, controlled inhale, but then an even longer relaxed exhale, it's going to help you to really regulate your nervous system. And so in free diving, we do an inhale for 2, hold for 2, out for 8 to 10, so that by the time we're ready to take that big breath and dive, your nervous system, your heart rate is down. So you basically get the most gas out of your tank, right? When you take that big breath, your heart's not pumping as much. And so you're not expending as much energy and you can have a longer dive. And so I use that in my day to day every single day. And if I'm experiencing a negative emotion, I immediately go to my breath and just, you can do super easy like box breath. So in for 4, out for 4, in for 5, out for 5. I know you work a lot with breath work. Is there anything that, you kind of want to share with people in terms of tools?
Yeah, I have a teacher, Yogi Amrit Desai. He would say that the fastest way to change your mind is to change your breath. I think we often say move a muscle, move a thought, or move a muscle, change a thought, which I think works very well. But you can't always get up and go for a run. The changing of the breath. Here's how I think that works. This is anecdotal, not fact. I'm not a scientist with a ton of data, which maybe I get challenged for with this, but from my experience is it seems to be that, when we're in a state of fight or flight, and we need, if we're in a state of sympathetic charge, we don't even have to call it fight or flight, we need more oxygen. We're going to have a different breath pattern, right? We don't, fight or flight is not where you want to be for free diving. You want to be in rest. You want to be rested, right? Like in relaxation. If you needed to swim away as fast as possible from a shark, you don't want to be in relaxation. You want to be in sympathetic with your heart rate going as fast as, maybe not as fast as possible, but you want it, probably want to get to
Whomever.
maximum so you can swim as fast as you can. So if we believe, if we can look at when someone's in a reactive state, there's a part of them that is in that kind of fight or flight. They feel they have a perceived threat. Someone that's learning to free dive, the perceived threat might be that they're going to drown, right? And there's an actual threat of that, so that might be the best thing. But they might. So when someone has a perceived threat, that's what they're in that state. And so you're going to breathe in a certain way that brings the energy to your, maybe people are in a freeze state also, which is similar, that they're holding their breath or they're breathing faster or they're not breathing deeply. And I really believe that when you can slow that breath down, there's something being signaled to your body that says you're in danger in some way. Even if your mind thinks, I'm not really in danger, but if you're reacting like that, it's signaling some way you're in danger. I think if you can take that breath and slow it down, I think it sends another signal that says, if I can breathe like this and I can chill my nervous system, I must not be a threat. So breath work, I was thinking about this earlier, as I've been practicing different forms of breath work for many, many years. It's just been a resurgence and we learn about it a lot, from people on social media platforms, and thank God for that. But it gets really lumped into one category. It's kind of like saying, in order to get fit, I exercise. Well, okay, what does that mean, right? There's exercise. You could say that's yin yoga, that's bringing your nervous system down. It could be, running a 200-mile ultra marathon. It could be swimming in the ocean. There's many things that it could be, right? And the same with breath work. There's different forms of breath work. I like to put it in a few different categories, right? So there's things that we can use to down regulate, which would be to relax. That's what you just talked about, right? You're down regulating your nervous system in a way that your heart rate's low. You can let all the gas out, and then you can be probably as calm as possible with as much oxygen in your body as you're swimming down deep and in an environment that we're not supposed to breathe in, right? There's upregulate, and we see this in other forms. I think Wim Hof will do both, and there's other ones out there, but that people will use to get energized, in yogic fire breathing, stuff like that, right? It's bringing our focus, our awareness up.
Yes.
So there's,
Hyperoxygenating.
what's that?
You're hyperoxygenating.
Yeah. So you're down regulating and up regulating. And those are tools that can be used. And there's many different type. For down regulating, you mentioned the box breathing. I like to just breathe in through your nose and take really slow exhales through softly pursed lips. Almost like, it's kind of interesting. I think if you went to a yoga class or something like that, you'll hear someone, the teacher might say, take a deep breath in, hold it at the top, and gently let it go. What's interesting is if you watch somebody smoke a cigarette, they usually take a deep breath, they hold it at the top, and they gently let it go. I'm not suggesting to start smoking to be mindful, but I think there's a secondary gain other than the nicotine and all of that, it's probably for a lot of people that smoke or vape, it's probably one of the only times that they're fully breathing in the day. My argument is not to start that. My actual argument would be if we took smoke breaks like people take vape and cigarette breaks, we might just change our collective perspective. We'd all just be breathing. I forget, was it the Dalai Lama who said, teach every 7-year-old to meditate and you'll change the world in a generation or two, something like that. I don't know how true that is, but I think if we were, people say, I can't meditate, I can't do this kind of stuff. If you're just doing that, doing the box breathing or the thing that I talked, the breath that I talked about for 5 or 6 times a day, it would start to really build some down regulate, so you had some capacity. And then there's the upregulation. There's just techniques to help you really focus. And then there's other forms of breath work, like holotropic breath work. Some people call it, the Stanislav Grof started. There's breath work that's some people call rebirthing breath work. And that's more of like kind of facilitated. It's longer generally. Oftentimes there's music playing, and it really is almost akin to what happens in a like psychedelic experience, where it helps people kind of go places that they haven't gone, to maybe achieve states that they haven't been able to experience, and not to change them structurally forever. But I've had so many people in breathwork experiences like that to be like, wow, I never thought I could forgive, and I experienced forgiveness. Now, that doesn't mean that they're done. It just means that, or like forgiven myself, or that I feel at peace. And it doesn't mean they're going to be at peace forever, but they maybe, like you talked about, never felt that relaxation or never felt that peace. And now they have this touchstone experience that they can build toward. So I like to, some people might be able to categorize these in other categories, but those are the three big pools that I put them: up regulation, down regulation, and more of a, like a clinical process.
Yeah, and you mentioned when you exhale that it's gonna be easier to extend that exhale through pursed lips, so that's actually something that we teach in freediving. We always say we wanna hear our students hissing, so we want them to inhale, hold, and then so you're literally making that, like, sound out, and that lets you have that really, really long exhale, and they make products that, help you out with that. There's one that I've used before, it's called The Shift by I think it's called
I've
Cumoso
seen it.
Design. So cool. I literally keep it on my desk. And I
But
think it's great for people with an oral fixation too, if they're trying to quit smoking or anything, because it's for people who don't know, it's literally just a little think about like a 2-inch size metal
I
straw.
know.
Yeah.
I probably a few years before that came out, I was like, I'm gonna make something like that. And I actually had this little PVC pipe that I was gonna like make a model out of, and I cut it, but then I never did anything with it. In yogic breathing, it's called the Shitali breath. I actually call it the smoker's breath because it's like, which might be a terrible name for it, but I think it's actually like, someone's doing that almost like they have a cigarette in their mouth when they're pursed lips. And
Right.
I think you're right. It's great for, we see it a lot with, people vaping. I think vaping is challenging because people can do it anywhere. I'm not saying that people should smoke cigarettes either, but you used to have to like go out somewhere and have, and like, to a section, or if someone was smoking marijuana, they had to like roll a joint and go hide somewhere. Now it's like in a delivery method that people can do. I see people doing, you're not supposed to, but I see people doing it on airplanes.
Yes. I know.
But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Breathwork has
Don't vape,
been
don't smoke cigarettes, kids.
Yes, we don't condone any of that. But yeah, I breathwork's been huge for me and just I think figuring out like those tools to keep you in that kind of relaxed state that you want to stay in, right? Are you staying hydrated? Are you eating? Are you running on stress? Are you running on food, healthy nutrients, and staying hydrated? I had a doctor one time. She was like, just make sure you stay hydrated because it can make you, tired. It can make you irritable. It can give you brain fog. And I was like, what? I had no idea that being dehydrated could not just be that you're thirsty and dehydrated, like physically, but it can actually change how you feel mentally.
Oh yeah. And sleep and hydration is a very important thing. I struggle with the hydration part. My wife drinks it. She's really good.
Yeah, my rule is whenever I am about to stand up from somewhere, if I'm at my desk or at the dinner table, I finish my water all the way down. I'm like,
Well,
okay, this finishes now. Yeah, try it.
I'm
It
gonna
works.
steal that from you. I have two bottles sitting on my desk here, so one
Yeah,
of them
you
might be a
can't get
little
up
old.
until you finish it. And I do the same
Both of
thing.
them?
Well, I mean, how big are they? I don't know. But if you once you get down to one, and
It's
that's
one,
kind of
it's
your
one of those jugs. No,
yeah, once you get
listen.
down to having one with you, it's a good trick for sure.
And another distinction I want to make is like, when we're talking about being in these relaxed states, that doesn't mean that we're relaxed. This might sound weird, right? But I don't think well, I would say this. I would assert that the goal in life is not to just be like relaxed, like you're comfortable all the time. But when we can get to these more relaxed states where we have more capacity to handle discomfort, then we can lean into the stress states, because part of life is, I mean, I say this all the time. I teach people all the time how to feel bad, or I work with them, that we're going to experience pain. We're going to experience grief. We're going to experience loss. We're going to experience shame and guilt. Some of these are appropriate emotions at certain times. And I, I think to not experience those doesn't make, I don't know if that's living, right? Because I think they kind of are, we're in a duality. Like, in order to experience the heights of joy, we need to be able to experience the depths of pain. And I don't mean that in a sadistic type of way, but like, I love my parents. At some point, potentially they're older than me. Potentially they'll go before me. Like, it's going to hurt. And I wouldn't want to like someone I love to die. And I'll be like, like, it would have meant that there's a lot of meaning in there, and we bring a lot of meaning to life. And like, it doesn't mean that I'm going to like it and dance and be like, but when it happens, I'm not going to like be happy that I'm hurting, but there's a relationship that I've built, or, we've been able to have really been able to love so deeply and experience heights of joy. And I mean that with all kinds of things. So like, it shouldn't be, I think we can chase some of these practices almost in a hedonistic way where people will just want to experience happiness all the time. And I think like even when people talk about bliss, like the bumper sticker version of bliss is I'm happy all the time, right? I think the real definition of it is like I'm not attached. And when I become attached, I can recognize I'm attached. And, we could get into some of the Buddhist teachings or yogic teachings around that. But I think that, I'm not going to have these experiences define me in a way that I'm going to stay stuck in pain and grief and all of that, but I can navigate my way through it, right? That when the seas get rough, we've got a strong ship that can navigate the seas. We can navigate the storm, not just to be in calm water all. Sorry, soapbox over.
No, that was excellent. Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned the name of your book in there. Do you want to talk a little bit?
Yeah. Thank you. It's a working title. It's a work in process. I'm hoping by the end of the year. Yeah, the working title is How to Feel Bad, Embracing Pain as a Pathway to Peace. That it really helping people it's not really a book about tools, but it's more building the framework for which to put the tools in to really understand. First, we're talking about like challenges, or if we identify them as problems, these new problems that we're talking around stress or what we see with social media or whatever that the problem is that we see are not new. I mean, the things with social media might be, but a lot of when we look at it contextually, there are challenges that man has been facing for centuries, maybe since the dawn of man, about being still alone in a room with himself. I think Blaise Pascal, said something like man's chief problem. He didn't say it like that, but like the biggest problem of man is that he can't is sitting alone in a room by himself in silence, something like
Alone
that.
with the Mind.
Alone with the mind, right? And talking about anxiety and depression is not new. It might have had different terms, but we kind of in the book, we're getting into some of the philosophy and the different things in religious and spiritual practices to address this idea of raising our capacity to experience difficult things and lean into these difficult emotions, not just to run away from them, not just, as Michael Singer says, want to have more of what we want happen, have what we want to happen more, and what we don't want to happen less, like meeting life where it is and navigating through it, and then understanding how our history, and we're describing and helping people understand how their history shapes them in a way that they do react to life the way they do, and then what implications that has in their present day, and then really how they can build themselves in a way and use tools to release that and move out of, like, we find ourselves often plagiarizing from our past, right? We're rewriting the story that existed, and we want to move to becoming the authors of our life going forward. So that's really the hope of it. It's still a work in process, but to give people not like I never want to be like, this is the thing that works, but I think whatever tools you're applying and protocols you're using, and there's a lot of them out there, that are great, but who am I in the middle of this, and why am I employing this, and what am I aiming it at? Oftentimes when I work with people, we come up with a plan for them going forward. I don't want to just come up with a plan of things that I think are great. Like, if we work together and I'm like, Cassie, you got to do this for 4 hours a day to, like, find peace in your life. Well, you don't have 4 hours in your day to do that, or you'd rather be spending it doing something else. It's more like, okay, how do we take some of the things you're already doing for mind, body, and spirit, right? So maybe it's body, I know you do hiking and you're free diving. That can get incorporated, and it doesn't have to be also on going to the gym for 6 hours a day, right? That might be something you also do, but how do we aim that at your growth? That your spiritual practice might not only be a religious practice or praying to God or being in wilderness, but it might be the time that you're spending breathing underwater, right? That we can identify some of these things that we're already doing and point them to them, and coming up with a structure that has people kind of build the life that they want to live and write their story going forward.
I've read Atomic Habits. I'm sure you've read it or heard of it. It's a very popular book. But in the book, what they teach basically is if you want to build, strong habits, a strong morning routine, use something that you already do as the trigger for the next habit you want to build. So first thing you get up in the morning, you go into the bathroom, and then after that, maybe before you grabbed your phone, but now you want to replace that with meditation. It's like, okay, you get up, you go to the bathroom, you immediately go sit down and meditate. And then once you do that for, they say 21 days to form a habit. So give or take on that. But once you do that, you're kind of like, okay, I've got that habit down. Then you want to incorporate journaling, you meditate and then you do the journaling right after. That's personally how I've built a really strong morning routine because as a business owner, I used to wake up, immediately grab my phone. Sometimes grab my phone while I'm still in bed and start checking emails, start checking Slack, and just immediately start reacting to what others need, right? And just communicating with other people before I've even gotten out of bed. And so, probably maybe 5 years ago or so, it was like during COVID that I was like, okay, I'm doing this morning routine thing. I watched the Netflix documentary, Miracle Morning, and there's a book on it too, but it just talks about protecting that first 10 to 60 minutes of the day, whatever you have time for, and having that be where you regulate, wake up. A lot of us have high cortisol in the morning, like I personally do. So having that protected time in the morning before you start reacting to others and, just kind of doing what other people need you to do, heading up that morning routine of healthy habits has been huge for me. So first thing when I wake up, I go to the bathroom and then I meditate. I put my red light mask on, I lay down, I meditate, I drink some water and journal. And like that is kind of my morning routine. And I do that before I start reacting to others. Because if I immediately just start reacting to people, Ryan's got stuff going on and I've got to do something for him. It's just like there's no time for yourself. And then it just when I have that morning routine, the way the rest of my day goes is always so much better because you never know what's going to happen in a day. So, set yourself up right. Well, if people want to, hear more from you, work with you, I know that you do men's retreats, you do one on one sessions. Where can they go? What does that look like?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's ryan.suave, Soave. I have a link tree on there where you can find my website. It's ryansuave.com. I have a free course on there. It's an email course. If you sign up, you can take it. And then there's some options on there to email me or set up some sessions with me. I don't have any retreats coming up yet, but I'll put when you sign up for on my website, you'll get a newsletter that'll have everything that we're up to there. But mostly everything that I've got out on Instagram and YouTube, it's just no cost information and tools that people can use. So that's pretty much it.
Yes, if you're listening, go check out Ryan's social. I have consumed all of his content on there and I learn something new every single time I watch a video. So, Ryan, thank you
Yeah,
so much for today. It was a
mostly
pleasure.
Instagram and YouTube. So go
Yes.
there, watch it.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, Cassie. I really appreciate it.